So we're up to Daf Chav Gimel and Aleph. We're about 2/3 of the way down the Daf by Boyer of Zera. So yesterday's Daf we talked about birds, and there's young birds, old birds, and the intermediary stage. So the Gemara talks about another concept of an intermediary stage in halacha. So you have a lamb, which is the first 11 months of its birth, and then it turns into a ram, which is 13 months. Now the 12th month, it's called a palgus. The shaila is, how do you define a palgus in halacha? So by Rav Zera ha'omer, if a person says herei alai oilas behema min ha'ayil min ha'keves, if a person says I am obligated to, I'm mechayev myself to bring an oila from either a lamb or a ram, vehevi palgus, and instead of a lamb or ram he brings a palgus. Mahu, what is the halach? In other words, is a palgus a suffix that we're not sure what it is, but it's one of the two? It's either a lamb or a ram, in which case he said he has to bring either a lamb or a ram. If it is a lamb or a ram, he's yaitz chiyuv. Or perhaps no. Perhaps a palgus is a bria b'fnei atzmai. If it's a bria b'fnei atzmai, if it's a new category, then it's neither a lamb or a ram, then there's no shaila, he's not yotza. So the Gemara says the truth is, Rav Yochanan shita is that a palgus is a bria b'fnei atzmai. Ali b'd Rav Yochanan leiti boilach. According to Rav Yochanan, a palgus is a bria b'fnei atzmai. In which case you're not yotza, dama bria have. In which case it's poshut, you're not yotza, because you said you're going to bring a lamb or a ram. This is neither a lamb or a ram. It's a palgus. It's a bria b'fnei atzmai. Where is Rav Yochanan shita? It's not. Because we know that the libations of a lamb and a ram are not the same. Let's say, for an example, it's not true, but let's say a ram is 2 quarts of wine and a lamb is 1 quart of wine. So it's different shiurim. So let's say a person brings a palgus. He doesn't make a nether. He shows up with a palgus. What's the halacha? The Mishnah says, Hekrivoi, if you bring a palgus, maybe a love nische ayil. It has the libations of a ram. But it does not count as your obligation, meaning if you were obligated to bring a ram and you bring a palgus, you're not yoytzi your chiyuv, but it has the libations of a ram. Now that's the Mishnah. Rav Yochanan clarifies, why is it? What's the source that the palgus has the libations of a ram? Because oy la'ayil, the pasuk says la'ayil, that you bring a libation of a ram. The extra oy is l'rabis is a palgus. It's to include a palgus. Now the general rule is, we had a shaila before, is a palgus a bria b'fnei atzmai or is it a suffix? The Torah, the fact that the Torah includes a palgus specifically, according to Rav Yochanan, that he has a drasha, that oy is l'rabis is a palgus, implies that a palgus is a bria b'fnei atzmai. Why? Because if it's a suffix, it's either a lamb or a ram. It's not a new category. The Torah does not address feikas. You're not going to have the Torah talk about ben hashmoshes. You understand? So the fact that the Torah says oy l'rabis is a palgus implies that a palgus is a new category. It's a new category b'fnei atzmai, and that's why it's included. So according to Rav Yochanan, it's a bria b'fnei atzmai. There's no shaila. The question is, the one who disagrees with Rav Yochanan, Bar Pedah, what would Bar Pedah say? The Gemara says, Aliba Bar Pedah, the shaila is, go to the next page. What did Bar Pedah say? Bar Pedah says like this. He looks at a palgus as a suffix, and therefore, Bar Pedah says like this, Maisi umasni. When you bring the libation of a ram for a palgus, if you bring a palgus, let's say again, a ram is 2 quarts of wine and a lamb is 1 quart, let's say. If you show up with a palgus, so it says, Rav Pedah, you bring the 2 quarts, but you make the following stipulation. You stipulate, if it's a ram, then the 2 quarts are for the palgus. If a palgus is really a lamb, then 1 quart is for the palgus and 1 quart is just an additional extra nedava. The shaila is, so Bar Pedah, it's a suffix. The question is, what type of suffix is it? According to Bar Pedah, is a palgus a suffix lamb or a suffix ram, or is it a suffix lamb, suffix ram, or suffix bria b'fnei atzmai? Meaning, when Bar Pedah said that it's a suffix, and therefore you make a stipulation, what did he mean? Did he mean that it's a suffix lamb, suffix ram? So you take the 2 quarts of wine, you say, if it's a lamb, it's 1 quart for the palgus, and 1 quart is additional nedava. If it's a ram, then the 2 quarts are for the palgus. Those are the choices. It's either a lamb or a ram. Now back to our discussion. If you said you're going to bring a carbon that's either a lamb or a ram, and you bring a palgus, according to Bar Pedah, you'd be yotza, because it's either a lamb or a ram. However, there's another possibility. According to Bar Pedah, it's really a lamb or a ram or a bria b'fnei atzmai. In which case, you take the 2 quarts and you say, if it's a ram, the 2 quarts are for the palgus. If it's a lamb, then 1 quart is for the palgus and 1 quart is additional. And if it's a bria b'fnei atzmai, then the 2 quarts are optional. If that's the case, that there's a possibility it's a bria b'fnei atzmai, you would not be yotzi your carbon. Why? You said you're going to bring a lamb or a ram. It's possible it's neither a lamb or a ram. It's a bria b'fnei atzmai. That's the shaila of Bar Pedah. Idum bria b'fnei ami damri b'rei havi lahavi kulin nedava. Teku, we are not sure. Another shaila. The shaila is like this. Now, Boy Rav Zera. Rav Zera says, Ha'omer, if a person says, Harei alai lachmei toda. If a person says, I'm going to bring 10 loaves of the lachmei toda, min hachametz oy min hamatzah. I'm either going to bring it from chametz or matzah, vehebi sa'ar. And instead you brought sa'ar, mahu, what's the halacha? So let me explain outside and then we'll see it inside. Now, sa'ar is neither, it's sort of this in-between stage of chametz and matzah. Now, you have matzah, and you have chametz, and you have sa'ar. Now, what is sa'ar? So it's a machlekes Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda. According to Rav Meir, sa'ar is where the dough turns pale, even though it doesn't have cracks. So it turns pale. According to Rav Meir, it is now in the category of sa'ar. Now, what is the halacha if you eat said dough on Pesach? So Rav Meir's shita is that you get lashes, because technically it's really chametz, but you don't get chayiv kares. That's when it's pale. Once it develops cracks, it's chayiv kares. That's Rav Meir's shita. Rav Yehuda disagrees, twofold. Rav Yehuda first of all feels that just pale, which Rav Meir believes is sa'ar, Rav Yehuda says is straight up matzah. No problem, you can eat it on Pesach. Then, what is sa'ar? When it develops cracks. Which according to Rav Meir, developing cracks is really chametz gomer. According to Rav Yehuda, is now sa'ar. So meaning what Rav Meir defines as sa'ar, Rav Yehuda defines as matzah, and what Rav Yehuda defines as sa'ar, Rav Meir defines as chametz gomer. Now, according to Rav Yehuda, if you eat sa'ar, according to Rav Meir, if you eat sa'ar, whatever his sa'ar is, you get lashes. According to Rav Yehuda, you don't get lashes. So you have a shaila of what is sa'ar. What's the shaila in the Gemara? The shaila in the Gemara is like this. When you bring a toida, you bring 40 loaves, 30 matzah, and 10 chametz. Let's say a person says, I'm going to bring 10 loaves of the lachmei toda, and I'm either going to bring chametz or matzah. Now, how you could bring 10 out of 40, the Gemara will clarify in a few moments. But you say you're going to bring 10 loaves, either chametz or matzah, and you show up with 10 loaves of sa'ar. The question is sa'ar suffik chametz, suffik matzah, but it's one of the two, or is it new category? Now, the Gemara clarifies. Again, we have to address, obviously, how are you bringing just 10 loaves? Like, what do you do with the other 30? But we'll deal with that in a second. The Gemara also says, you brought up sa'ar. Now, who's sa'ar? Again, according to Rav Meir, the sa'ar of Rav Meir is matzah according to Rav Yehuda. The sa'ar of Rav Yehuda is chametz gomer according to Rav Meir, so it's not a shayla. So the Gemara clarifies. Sa'ar deman. Sa'ar de Rav Meir. If it's sa'ar according to Rav Meir, Rav Yehuda matzah ma'alaisi. According to Rav Yehuda, that's straight up matzah. So it can't be that you're asking Rav Yehuda about the sa'ar of Rav Meir. And either Rav Yehuda, and if you're asking the sa'ar of Rav Yehuda Rav Meir to Rav Meir, that's chametzu. That's straight up chametz. So that can't be. So, okay, let's keep going. Maybe it's sa'ar of Rav Meir to Rav Meir. But here's the problem. What's the shaila? Is it a suffix? Is it a bria b'fnei atzmo? The problem is, according to Rav Meir, if you eat sa'ar, Rav Meir's sa'ar, so it's pale but no cracks. What is the halacha? You get lashes. Why do you get lashes? Because it's chametz, right? What lav is it under? Chametz. No, you don't get kares, but it's straight up chametz. So the Gemara says, either Rav Meir or Rav Meir, midalaki la chametz hava. So the Gemara says, okay, our only shaila is Rav Yehuda. You have sa'ar according to Rav Yehuda, which according to Rav Yehuda, if you eat, you don't get lashes. The question is, what is it? Is it a suffix, chametz, suffix, matzah, and that's why you don't get lashes, or it's a bria b'fnei atzmai? And Rav Yehuda, my sveika have v'nafkim manushach. Do we say that it's a suffix? And therefore, for our case, when you show up with the 10 loaves, and you said you're going to bring 10 loaves of either chametz or matzah, this is either chametz or matzah, we just don't know, but you're yotze, you're chiyav. Dilma, bria have nafik, or perhaps it's a new category, you're not yotze. So the Gemara, again, has to address the obvious problem, which is, I get your question, but the question is, how are you showing up with just 10 loaves? And more than this, when a person says, I'm going to bring a carbon toda, you have now a chiyav upon yourself. That is it's a heavy chiyav that can only be removed by showing up with 30 loaves of matzah and 10 loaves of chametz. If I show up with sa'ar, even 40 loaves of sa'ar, it won't help me. Why? Because if it's a bria b'fnei atzma, it's for sure out. But let's say it's a suffix. How am I yotze my chiyav with a suffix? Right? Let's say I show up with 10 loaves, right? 10 loaves of sa'ar. What else do I have? I need 40 loaves total. So let's say I show up with 30 loaves of matzah and I have my 10 loaves of sa'ar. Would I be yotze my chiyav? No, because the Kohen would say, well, maybe that sa'ar is really matzah and it's not chametz. And if you show up with the 10 loaves, let's say I show up with 10 loaves of chametz and 20 loaves of matzah, and I need 30 total, 30 loaves of matzah total, and I show up with 10 loaves of sa'ar, you're also not going to be yotze chiyav. I mean, in other words, when you have a chiyav upon yourself, you cannot remove it unless you're for sure, like you're definitive that you're yotze your chiyav. because Sa'ar is a suffix, at best it's a suffix, how are you Yossi Yechiv? And how are you showing up with just 10 out of 40? Says the Gemara, Ha'amar Rav Yehuda, doesn't Rav Yehuda say Ravuna and say Ha'omer, if a person says Harei le'lachmei toda, if a person says, I'm going to bring just the bread of the toda without the meat, maybe toda v'lachmei, you have to bring the carbon toda as well, because there's no such thing as just bread. Now, once you have to bring 40 loaves, kivan dichayev le betoda v'lachma, once a person is obligated to bring a toda, so if I say I'm going to bring a toda and bread, now I have a chiyuv upon myself, and the only way to remove my chiyuv is to show up with 30 loaves of matzah and 10 loaves of chametz. And if I show up with sa'ar, because it's a suffix, how am I yotze my chiyuv? Suffix d'oraisa l'chumra, you're not going to be yotze your chiyuv. V'halo yoda, this person does not know, hi gavri, chametz haved, d'laisi matzah, i matzah haved, d'laisi chametz. How are you doing this? So Gemara says, you're right. The case is as follows. I have a friend of mine named Ruvain, and Ruvain has to bring a lachmei toda. And I say, I want to fulfill I'm going to show up with 10 loaves for him. Meaning, the Gemara says, Loit tzricha d'amar, harei alei chala, I'm going to bring 10 loaves, because we had a question, what's 10 loaves? The answer is, it's not for your 40. My friend has to show up he has to bring a toda. And I tell him, listen, don't bring 40, you just show up with 30, I'll get the last 10. And I show up with sa'ar. My shaila is lifter to dasa shulpone. I'm showing up with 10 to be moitzi my friend's chiyuv. And the question is sa'ar suffix, is sa'ar chametz or matzah that it could be yotza my chiyuv? But here's the problem. Same issue. I'm only yotza my chiyuv if my friend is covered. I said that I'm going to bring 10 loaves of either chametz or matzah in order to be motzi my friend, which means I am only covered my obligation if my friend Ruvain is also covered. Now I show up with 10 loaves of sa'ar. Now how is that going to help Ruvain? Ruvain has the same problem. If he tries to use these 10 as chametz, the Kohen will say maybe it's matzah. If he tries to use them as matzah, the Kohen will say maybe it's chametz. In other words, you cannot use the sa'ar practically. So the same way I can't use it for myself, I'm trying to be moitzi my friend's chiyuv, my friend's not going to be able to be moitzi my chiyuv. And I'm only fulfilling my obligation when my friend is covered. Saif, halo yada hagavri chametz aved delaisi matzah, imatzah aved delaisi chametz. Gemara says you're right. The case is where I say I'm obligated upon myself to bring 10 loaves in order to help my friend, and even if my friend can't use them, meaning I just said I'm going to bring 10 loaves of either chametz or matzah for my friend. Whether he could use it or not is irrelevant. So now the question is it either chametz or matzah, in which case I showed up with chametz or matzah, or is it b'rei b'fnei atzmai? That's a shayla. My friend can't practically use it doesn't matter. Like tzricha d'lo amar lifter, maybe gavi de nidra. The question is, am I in my obligation to show up with by showing up with sa'ar or not? Teiku, we're not sure. The Mishnah basically again is continuing in this theme of what's good for one is not good for the other, and just very simple to know what the Mishnah is referring to. A para aduma is shechted with the knife against the neck, and an egla rufa is you head it over the back of the head with an axe. So it says the Mishnah, kasha bepara pasal ba'agala. That which is kasha for paraduma, i.e. shchita, is pasal for a egla rufa, meaning if you shecht an egla rufa, you're not yoitza. And kasha ba'agala, and that which is valid for egla rufa, which is hitting over the back of the head with an axe, pasal bepara, is disqualified for a para, meaning if you hack the back of a paraduma with an axe, you're not yoitza the paraduma. Tan Rabban, the Gemara says, para b'shchita kshera, a paraduma must be shechted. Ba'arifa psula, but if you do the arufa process, which is hitting over the back of the head with an axe, pasal. The opposite is true for an egla rufa. Egla ba'arifa kshera, the shchita psula. Nimtzis, the summary is, kasher bepara pasal ba'agala, kasher ba'agala, pasal bepara. That which is good for paraduma, i.e. shchita, is not good for egla rufa. That which is good for egla rufa, which is arufa, is not good for a paraduma. So the Gemara says, I have the following kavachomer. Te para kshera ba'arifa me kavachomer. I think a paraduma, you should be able to hit it over the back of the head with an axe. Why? Kavachomer. Uma egla shalei huchshu b'shchita. If an egla rufa, which cannot be shechted. So it's very hard to be yotzi your chiv with an egla rufa. So shchita is not enough, but hitting over the back of the head of the axe is enough. Huchshu b'arifa. Para shehuchshu b'shchita, the paraduma, which can merely be shechted, eino din shehuchshu b'arifa. All the more so, you should be able to be yotze your obligation by hitting over the back of the head with an axe. In other words, if you could shecht it, kavachomer, you should be able to do arufa. So what's the source that you cannot do arufa for a paraduma? So Amar Kra, the pasuk says regarding the paraduma, v'shachat. It says it has to be shechted, to the exclusion of all other processes, including arufa. So you see the fact that it says v'shachat implies that nothing else works. It says the Gemara, maybe v'shachat is just a suggestion, but other things are option. V'chuka, it also says chayk. Meaning, you have a kavachomer that you want to say, the pasuk says v'shachat, which implies shchita, but you have a kavachomer to include arufa, it says chukah. Chukah means it has to be as the Torah says, so chukah overrides the kavachomer, b'shchita in, b'arufa lo. Says the Gemara, does any time it says the word chok, that means I can't apply a kavachomer to override it, right? The pasuk says v'shachat. I make a kavachomer to include arufa. The answer is you can't do that because it says chuk, chayka. Is that true? Every time it says chok in the Torah, that means that I cannot change the halacha with the kavachomer. Here's my problem. The problem is v'ha Yom Kippur. We know that by Yom Kippur it says the word chok, which means the process of Yom Kippur, the process of karbanos and Yom Kippur. It says the word chok, and yet Vitanya aso chatas. Right? We know that there were two. The two goats of Yom Kippur, one is Lashem, one's Lazazel. So how do you make one Lashem, one Lazazel? So you have to draw lotteries. It has to be through a lottery system. Now let's say instead of a lottery system, I just say, this is Lashem, Lazazel. I decide. The halacha is, it's no good. You have to do it by lots. Merely designating it just by decision is not enough. Now, oral designation is not enough. You need a lottery. Now, that's the pasuk, and it says choik. So right there, even if you have a kavachomer that you should be able to do with oral designation without a lottery, I should say to you, be quiet. It says chayk, but it's not what the Gemara says. What does it say? I have a kavachomer that you should be able to just do it, just decide on your own with merely oral designation without a lottery. Why? When it comes to other karbanos where lotteries don't help, i.e. birds, right? If you have two birds in front of you, one's an ola and one, you have to make one an ola, one a chatas. You don't do a lottery, you just decide. A lottery won't help. But if you just pick up, you don't say the words, you just pick up, one paper that says oila, it doesn't work. So when it comes to regular karbanos, lotteries don't help. And yet, Kiddush Hashem, oral designation does work. So makam shekiddush hagarol. Then during the Yom Kippur process, where a lottery works, in it, didn't Kiddush Hashem, I have a kavachomer, you should be able to just merely do oral designation. And it says chok. So really the answer should just be, instead of responding to this, the Brisa should just say, it says chok. But that's not what the Brisa says. Tam lomer v'asohu chatas. V'asohu chatas means, hagor lois chatas v'enashem es chatas. V'asohu chatas means that the lottery does a chatas. The question, what do you need this for? Time the kasar rachmana v'asohu chatas. Halav hachi darshin kavachomer. What do you see? That we would make a kavachomer, even though it says chok. So we had a question before, which the pasuk says v'shachat. How do I know that you can't do an arufa to the paraduma? How do I know that you can't just hack the back of the head with the paraduma with an axe? Oh, because it's chok. I have a kavachomer. Oh, it says chok. But the chok doesn't matter. We have the exact same shtickle Torah by Yom Kippur, and we didn't just say, it says chok. So what's the answer? So you see that you could make a kavachomer despite the fact that it says chok. So back to the original question, how do you know that you can't do an arufa process to a paraduma? The answer is, Mia Rachmana Gabi Egla. It says by the Egla arufa, ha arufa, implying that's the only animal in the Torah where arufa is done. Ha arufa, ba'arifa, ve'ena cheres ba'arifa. There's no other animal, i.e. the paraduma is not done with arufa. So it's not because of chok. It's a source that the arufa, the egla arufa is the only one done. That's how I know you cannot do an egla arufa process to a paraduma. Now just to finish up, te egla ksher b'shchita mekavachomer. Why can't I shecht an egla arufa? I'll make the following kavachomer. Ma partial hushka b'arifa. Ksher b'shchita, egla ksher b'arifa. In addition ksher b'shchita, if you're able to shecht a paraduma, then you should be able to shecht an egla arufa. So Amar Krav va'arfu ha'egla ha'arifa in b'shchita lo. It says va'arfu, which implying you have to do the arufa process and not shchita.